All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Yevo Institute for Jewish Research. Yevo, if you're not yet familiar, or if you'd like a reminder, is a special place for the contemplation and celebration of Jewish history and culture. Yevo's archives and library, as you may know, represent the single largest and most comprehensive collection of materials on Eastern European Jewish civilization in the world. So we are so glad to have you join us for today's event, European Jews in the 21st century. We're going a little bit beyond Eastern Europe to think about all of Europe. Throughout the event, we invite you to type your questions into the Q&A here on Zoom. We'll try and answer some of them towards the end of the event. And I'll also note that, like most all of Yevo's events, this event is being recorded, and so you will be able to watch it afterwards on YouTube. And I highly encourage you, if you don't already, to check out Yevo's YouTube channel and watch the many, many videos we have of previous programs there as well. So we'll start off. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Daniel Solomon. Daniel is the senior editor of K, the magazine that we're speaking about today. He runs the magazine's English language edition. He is a doctoral student in history at the University of California, Berkeley. He received his bachelor's degree from Harvard and is a former reporter at The Forward. His studies center on French and European Jews. So I will turn it over now to Daniel to introduce the other panelists and to lead them in a conversation.
Hello, we're so pleased to be in conversation with all of you today and see the broad range of locations from which all of us hail. I myself am in California right now, and today we will be leading a conversation about the situation of Europe's Jews today and tomorrow in historical and social context with three panelists, all of them French, but each with very much a pan-European perspective. And we all edit and participate in the running of the new European Jewish Review, K, which is based in Paris at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, which is a French institution of higher education dedicated to the social sciences. So I will introduce our panelists, one of whom is running a bit late. So we will scramble our programming somewhat, but no matter. The first person that we'll be talking today to is Stéphane Bou. Stéphane is the editor-in-chief of K. He used to be a reporter at Charlie Hebdo and Le Canard Enchaîné. He is a veteran of the French media, having worked at a whole range of outfits, and also very much having his feet in academia. He teaches a journalism seminar at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, and he has written books with such people as Saul Friedlander. So he's very much equipped to speak to us on this matter. The second person that we will be speaking to is Macha Fogel. She is K's columnist for, let's say, the world of Yiddishland, and she helps us edit our essays. Masha is a teacher at a Jewish school in the Paris area, a Jewish day school, and she, is a very avid translator and writer and reader of Yiddish. And our third guest, hoping that he can join us, is Danny Trom. He is the the executive editor of K, a senior researcher at the EHESS in Paris, the school, and someone who is widely seen as an eminent authority in France on Jewish matters. His latest book is called France Without the Jews, La France sans les Juifs. So that is, of course, something we're hoping to avoid, but nonetheless, we have to deal with that question. So I'm going to start with Stéphane. And I'm just going to ask him to give us an idea of why we need a European Jewish review, why today, uh, what is the situation of Europe's Jews today. And Stéphane, can you give us some of your personal experience as someone who's long worked in the French media, uh, both professionally and personally, what it means to be Jewish in that space, and why you felt the need to start this review?
Hello to everybody, and thank you to be with us tonight. And of course, I'm sorry because my English is not absolutely perfect, not even good enough. But I'll try to answer all of your questions. But it's a large question with several directions we can begin. I would say about the beginning of the review, Daniel, I would say it's an idea we had maybe 2-3 years ago, and it became more and more obvious for us to do it as a European review and not a French review, because the starting point was a very sad hypothesis we were in front of when you are in a European country. And about that, in the first issue we made, which came out, it was so 8 months ago. It was with the demographer Sergio de la Pargola about demographic question. First of all, maybe we can start by that. 1 century ago, 90% of the Jewish of the world were living in Europe. And today it's 9%. And I have to add that after the Holocaust, the 3/4 of the Jewish were at one moment present on the European soil left the country. And this movement of leaving Europe was probably became more efficient, more pregnant, more since maybe 15-20 years. So we were confronted to this hypothesis, this dystopian hypothesis that maybe in Europe, people like us were the contemporary Jews of a disconnection between the European fact and the Jewish fact. So we wanted to all around Europe about this kind of question, and beside, on a more academic side, to propose reflection, analysis, text, and in a different academic field. That's
interrupt you, Stéphane, for a moment? I just want to make it clear to our listeners, to our attendees. We opened our review in March with an issue, as Stéphane was saying, about demography. And, something that we had very much on our mind is the idea that Europe's Jewish population now is at its lowest percentage as representative of the overall population than it has been since 1000 AD. Now, this trend, as Stéphane was saying, continued to accelerate even after the Holocaust, where you still had about 2 million Jews living in Europe, to maybe 3 million, I believe, after the Holocaust. Now we're at about 1.3, 1.4 million. So a lot of the impetus for our reflections was whether the Jewish presence in Europe would endure.
Again?
We were, we're considering whether the Jewish presence in Europe would endure, and if so, under what conditions. So Stéphane, continue though. Tell us about why tell us maybe about why you felt that in Europe and in France, we needed a publication like K.
We needed a publication like K. You mean as a European review, as a European magazine or journal, because because there is a crisis basically. There is no more Jewish media about Jewish world in Europe, and all the magazines who exist are closed into the national bond of each country. So we wanted to enlarge the focus and we wanted to try to connect different communities of different countries all together and to speak about issues in each country and to see if what we feel in France, which is the biggest community in Europe, is the same in Great Britain, in Germany, in Italy, in the Balkans, at the east of Europe, etc. Of course, it's very different from in each country. But the idea was to see the 1.5 million Jewish who are still in Europe and think about living in France mostly. So is there still something like a I don't know if Masha is at the very beginning. Masha, we can't hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So I see that there are two questions in the Q&R, and I'd like to address them. When we speak about Europe, of course, we do include Great Britain, although I know they're no more part of the European Union. They are part of Europe and of the history of Europe. And we and also I would like, and there was another question about, where are people moving to? Mostly the US and Israel. And I just would like to add that, of course, the fall of the USSR was also very important in the history of European Jewry, since so many Jews, as you guys know, in the US, moved to the US and to Israel. But apart from these answers to the questions that were asked, I didn't hear, maybe there was a technical problem, I didn't hear if you asked me a question, Stéphane or Daniel.
No, I was just saying that I was just saying after I tried to expand my point of view, if you shared, that was...
Yes, so this is what I wanted to add.
Okay, but you are right, we include Great Britain, even if it's complicated with Great Britain, because the English Jews, they think themselves into a world with American, maybe before to think their place in the Europe context, but we work a lot with them, and we include Russia, Belarus,
Ukraine. And since we do include Russia and the
so it's not US Europe as a political institutional political entity we consider, but as a continent with very blur bound, very blur limits.
And I would also,
sorry, Masha, if I can just clarify, and just build on what you guys are saying, we made an intentional choice at Ka. I'm using the French, instinctively the French name, Ka rather than K. We made
the title, maybe I should say
we made a choice to. We made a choice at K to cover the entire continent because we recognize that we have to. due to the demographic shrinkage of European Jewry. Communities like those in Italy only have about 20,000 people left. Germany maybe has 100,000 maximum, I think, or something of that sort. France, we have the largest still at 500,000. So there is still, to some extent, a low community Jewish press in France. But even in France, that community press is often of low quality or quite partisan in its outlook. And so our goal in founding K was to basically be a meeting space, a common area in which we could all essentially, from across the continent, across political viewpoints, however large or small our Jewish community, participate in a continental conversation. And that's been, I think, we recognize that we are a community which is a remnant to a certain extent, and our goal is to marshal all of our collective energy in order to understand where we are and where we're going. And I want to ask Stéphane. Stéphane is a veteran, as I said, of the French media. He was a longtime reporter at Charlie Hebdo, which we all know of for better and worse. What it was like for him to understand that we needed this publication in France. Why? In the sense that, Stéphane, can you talk about your own sense of Jewish identity and how it's evolved in France over the past 20 or 30 years? You obviously grew up very secular, and now you've had this kind of move toward the Jewish space. Why? And what does that tell us about French and European Jews?
You are frozen. I don't know if you hear me. Do you?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, sorry, because everything was frozen. I come from a family where I'm secular. I come from a family, I think it's common in France. It's for French Jews of my generation, not all of them, of course. I am a very representative of a small group, but it's more than secular, because what was prevalent in my family was silence and secrets. So my mother was hidden during the war, and I never learned anything about Jewish question and the Jewish biography of my family before I was a teenager, and it was by chance, exterior circumstances. And I remember very clearly my mother telling me when I was 12 or 13 years old, now you know you are Jewish, don't tell anyone. So that's my experience, and I think it's very, I wouldn't say it's very common, but a lot of people of my generation who were in that kind of situation. Of course, Macha is not at all in the same situation. So for me, it was the Jewish question for me was first of all a teenager rebel against a familial environment where silence and secret was a painful atmosphere. And then it became more and more a question for me. And in my professional life, I wrote books, I write about this question. And I would say that a turning point for me, an instant of revelation, or was a march after the assassination of Ilan Halimi at the beginning of the years 2000, where I realized, as a journalist, where I was there as a journalist, that the Jewish people were marching against, after this assassination, so made 20 years ago, the Jewish were alone, in the, basically. And if you remember the Great March after the attack of the Copernic Synagogue, or after some profanation of Jewish cemetery in the east of France, all the Friends were there. So during the last 20 years, a sort of experience of Jewish French was that they were isolated, alone, a little bit disconnected from the national entity in a country where the construction of the national entity, and you know that better than me, Daniel, because you work on it as an historian, was thought through the Jewish question during the French Revolution.
Yeah.
So for me, this
Stéphane, can I just interrupt you just to add some clarity? Yeah, Stéphane didn't say this, but interestingly enough, he's also one of those French Jews whose mother was saved by being hidden in a Catholic convent, I believe, right, Stéphane?
Sorry, by?
Your mother, she was hidden by the nuns or the priests, right?
In a Catholic boarding school.
Exactly. And you yourself, you went to a Catholic school.
Yes, of course. I mean, of course,
this was part of the discretion.
My mother craziness, in a way. It was
This was part of the discretion of certain French Jews in the aftermath of the Holocaust, which was to minimize and downplay their identity as much as possible. And so you were part of that.
But I have to add, excuse me, Daniel, I have to add that my mother was always very, very ambivalent, and she used to live in New York in the late 70s, in the late 60s, during 2 years, and she realized she could live in a city, in a world where it was possible to say that she was basically Jewish. So she became with strong revendication against his own father, who is a survivor. And it was a very huge familial issue between her and her father. So yeah. she remained even today very ambivalent.
I want to just place that in historical context very briefly. Our other guest, Danny Trom, is sadly not able to join us due to technical difficulties, and he was supposed to answer some of these questions. So in lieu of him, I will answer some of them. Ilan Halimi, there was essentially France's Jewish community began to experience a wave of violence at the turn of the century due to disturbances in the Middle East, the Second Intifada, and France's own post-colonial heritage combined with the Israel-Palestine conflict and other social concerns about integration to produce a wave of hatred and violence against Jews in certain particularly urban neighborhoods where Jews and Muslims had lived together. The climax of this was the murder of Ilan Halimi, I forget which year, a very grisly murder in which he was targeted for being Jewish, essentially lynched. And this stirred great emotion in the French Jewish community. And we've had off and on since then high-profile murders of Jewish French people, often by, frankly, Muslim attackers, including Sarah Halimi recently, Mireille Knoll. Much of this violence, again, occurs in neighborhoods where Jews and Muslims have shared those neighborhoods and where Jews have sort of become representatives of a French society which is despised by certain people disaffected from it. And so I would say that French Jewish society feels embattled to a certain degree. But I actually want to go to that. I want to ask Masha to discuss that. How do French Jews feel today? What's the climate they exist in? Because you teach in that milieu.
Yes, one thing that we have to say about French Jewry is that actually the biggest part of the Jewish community nowadays in France are Jews coming from North Africa. So Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. So they actually come exactly from the same countries as the Muslim immigration that you were talking about, that part, which a part of can face some integration problems. So actually Jews do represent the French in a way, because they are the Jews come from the same countries, but they managed to make a living and to become integrated into the French society. And some people might say that they did better, and there are some jealous feelings, which of course, as always in anti-Semitism, is not always actually based on reality, but on what people feel, I would say. Another thing I would like to say is that about Europe in general, I talked about the importance of the fall of the former Soviet Union, and actually countries from the FSU have seen Jews living since 1992, and not only Russian-speaking countries, but also other ones. And because that question was asked in the Q&R, I will answer. They are living to the US, to Israel, and to Russia, actually, because many Jews from small countries from the FSU moved to Moscow or big Russian cities. So this is what I wanted to answer.
Masha, could I just ask you to address, can you tell us about the school you teach in?
Of course.
What's the climate there? How do people feel?
I teach to nice teenagers, and they personally don't always speak so much about it. But there is, in general, I have to say, in the Jewish community, which is more traditional, so not in the liberal communities, not so much in the cultural circles that Stéphane might come from, for example, but in the more traditional and broad Jewish community, there is a feeling of fear and also sometimes of hate against the Muslims in general. This is something that has to be said. Not so much now as it used to be before, because as Daniel said, there is a history, it's a very special history in France of Jews and Muslims coming from the same countries, who were neighbors once upon a time and who are neighbors again in the same neighborhoods in big cities in France nowadays. So they have, let's say, mixed feelings, both nostalgia and interest to the Arabic culture, and sometimes they feel very close to their Arabic Muslim neighbors, and sometimes on the opposite, they feel uncomfortable, let's say, and they react more or less violently inwards only inwards to the general climate.
Masha, can I just,
yes.
We had a question. Can you just clarify, you teach at a Jewish day school?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you teach
I teach French literature.
at French literature at a Jewish day school. And, I'm curious, like, what are the security concerns there? Do you
Oh,
guys have a metal detector? Do you have no signage outside saying where you are? How do you guys assess the security risk where you
so
are?
of course, very good question. Of course, in France, we are used to have a maximum security for all Jewish places. So you can't. So there are, first of all, there are several policemen standing in front of the school every morning. Second thing, you also have members from the Jewish security task who will stand in front of the school during the whole day. And in order to get in, you have to show a special card to show that you're part of the school, whether as a teacher or as a student, and then you can get in. But you don't have any metal detector.
Can I ask, how was it? I mean, were you there after in 2014 there was, sorry, 2012? 2012, I think. 2012, there was a horrible shooting in Toulouse of Jewish school children and teachers and parents. Were you teaching at this school at the time or no, where you are now?
Not at all, because at that time I was a correspondent for the French radio in Moscow.
I
So
see.
that was another life. But I can tell you that at that time, since then the security has been enhanced in front of Jewish schools. There is a question: does the French government pay for security? Yes, they do, absolutely. Jewish schools can also choose to have their own people standing in front of the school, but you will also always have policemen and sometimes even the army guarding.
Can I ask you, Masha, I think this is a question that some Americans might have. You have all this security, you have these security risks. Do your students, do their families, do you want to stay in France? Or do you want to leave?
So, Jews have been leaving France since year 2K because it became difficult for them to live in the neighborhoods where they were living because of high insecurity for everybody, but especially for Jews, and because of the deterioration of the education system and the risks that Jewish students had to be bullied as Jews in their schools, in some neighborhoods. So Jews started moving away, mostly to Israel, since year 2000. They also started leaving because they said that it was difficult to be a Jew, religiously speaking, in France, and that it would be easier in Israel. You also have some people who leave for personal reasons, whether because they're Zionists or because they want to have a new life somewhere else. This is also a reason. Are Jews who still live in France scared? I would say that in 2015, as you know, there have been several attacks in France. Since then, Jews stopped being the only, the first victims of terrorist attacks, and the whole nation became concerned about it. So maybe this makes Jews feel more part of a French community, and I feel like Jewish people have stopped living as much since then. I don't know if you have the numbers, but this is what I remembered from what I saw. Although, it's not constant. Some years show high rates of exodus from out from
Yeah.
France.
I had two questions, and then we'll end with Stéphane before we go to the Q&A. So when you speak to your students or their
The
parents,
review?
where do they see their future? Do they see their future as being in France, in Israel, in the United States, elsewhere?
So this is a very interesting question. We have an association of teachers teaching in Jewish schools, non-Jewish subjects, and some teachers, especially in history teachers, try to teach the history of Jews in France and to teach the French young Jews how Jews were living here in the Middle Ages, for example, before they were expelled. Or in the 19th century, or in the 20th century, and to show that there is a Jewish presence in France, which is extremely important and which has been important for hundreds of years. Rachi was, of course, French, as you all know. So we try to build a French Jewish identity. Now, even if people leave France, I feel like, at least for the first generations, they still feel French and still feel like they might go back to France when they move to the US or to Israel. And some people do come back to France, especially from Israel, because life is too difficult or for some other reasons, or because they miss their country. So it's not always a permanent, move. But I have to say that that more and more Jews, especially in the very traditional community, which I see at my school, more and more young people see their future in the US, for example. But this is also, that might also be because they watch Netflix serials and they're interested in life in the US. That also plays a role, especially for teenagers. But in the end, they enjoy their lifestyle here, because it's a very sweet life that we have in Europe.
Can I ask you, Masha, just before we go to Stéphane and then we go to the question and answer, obviously we're here with Yevo, and, so we have a special interest in the state of Yiddish culture and language in France. Where does that stand today? Where does Yiddishkeit? Where is Yiddishland in France? Where is that?
Yeah. Just one person is saying, as a Jew living in France, I would say it is not so awful to live in this country. Fully agree, not so awful. On the opposite, we have it's actually quite interesting and nice. Yes, about Yiddish. So there are two parts, in the Yiddish world. There is the Yiddishistic part, the Yiddishist part, and the Chassidish part. And in Europe, you will find Chassidim speaking Yiddish as a daily language in Great Britain, in Belgium, in Switzerland, and that's it. As for the Yiddishist world, you have a very big Yiddish center here in France with many books, which is the House for the Yiddish Culture in Paris. And people coming from Europe to study Yiddish at that center and producing very interesting work, translating into French or into English some works from Yiddish, or translating into Yiddish some works from other languages, and also writing in Yiddish and doing some studies. And there are people coming from Belgium doing that, from Eastern Europe. And we also have an important center in Vilnius in Lithuania. So you have some Yiddishist centers all around Europe, especially I would say in Lithuania and here in Paris. But of course, that Yiddish is more a cultural verse of the Yiddish language, whereas the Chassidish Yiddish is more a daily life aspect of it.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
I just would say something, because afterward I would forget. When you say it's not awful to live in France, I agree. For people like us, who are living in the center of Paris, is not the same situation that the whole Jewish world who live in a suburb, and we talk. Of course, there is a massive phenomenon since 20 years called, in French, l'alia intérieur, the alia interior. It was very much studied in sociology. So a lot of part of the Jewish world in all kind of different area in the suburb, basically, came in another part just because they want to find back a normal life. So it's, I don't know if awful is the word, but it's a sociological phenomenon we can't avoid to see in France. I mean,
I'm just going to.
How would you say alia intérieur?
An interior aliyah, interior migration. But Stéphane, I think you're making an important point. I just want to make several points and then ask you a question, and then we will go to Q&A. First, I noticed that someone in the chat mentioned Ethan Katz's book, The Burdens of Brotherhood, which is about French Jewish-Muslim relations. I highly recommend it to all of you. I should also add that Ethan is my advisor here at UC Berkeley, so he and I know each other quite well. Great book, and he's the reason I'm here at Berkeley, in fact. So yeah, I was pleased to see that come up in our chat. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, I do see these comments about how French Jewish life is not nightmarish. I'm not French, as you might be able to tell from my accent, but I live there part of the year, and I lived there permanently for 2 years. And I don't think that any of us wants to present a nightmarish picture of French Jewish life. French Jewish life in many ways is still extremely vital, from a whole host of cultural and social and intellectual institutions. French Jewry remains a beacon, I would say, of Jewish culture in Europe and worldwide, and it is the third largest Jewish community in the world. What we're speaking to is not this idea of imminent death, or that people wander on the streets and feel in danger of their lives all the time, but rather a certain malaise that has to do with feeling that certain neighborhoods have become unsafe for Jewish communities, that visibility as a Jew can sometimes be dangerous, and that there is a disjuncture between the Jewish experience and a larger French experience, which does not always understand the particular challenges of being Jewish. So we don't want to dramatize that, and we don't want to undermine, and we don't want to downplay it. And I think if you read our magazine, you'll see that we don't. But on that note, I wanted to ask Stéphane to tell us a bit about what sort of content, what sort of reporting, what sort of stories we are running in CA from France, but also from all of Europe, just to give you guys a better idea of what we're doing.
I can be very concrete on that. I would say, for instance, each week we publish 3 new pieces, and we try at the same time to find a balance between reportage, reports, journalist text column, and more academic, philosophical, sociological, and more theoretical text about all the kind of issue we could have talked about until now. So, for instance, in the last, if I see the last piece we published, I see a piece about the phenomenon Zemmour, the Zemmour phenomenon, which is this far-right ultra racist Jewish guy who is going to enter wants to run for the presidency in France. So it's a very complex phenomenon, and we probably there will have a lot of pieces to analyze this character, Eric Zemmour. I don't know at what point you already hear about him in the United States. But for instance, Jean-Marie Le Pen, you must know him. 3 days ago in Le Monde said, Eric Zemmour and we think exactly the same thing, but he's Jewish, so it's easier for him. So you can imagine how it's a problem to understand that kind of character for us. We also publish a piece about the complex dispute and polemics about the memorialization of Babi Yar, because it was the 80th anniversary of the Babi Yar massacre. So the fact is that since 1955, since the end of the war, in Babi Yar, in Kiev, there is no consensus about what there is to build there to memorialize this tragic event. So it's a long piece about the history of the problem and also very much in the field of the problem.
Stéphane, I'm gonna cut you off just to say, I want to emphasize that we do have very much a European focus and coverage. So, if you go on our website, which I encourage you to do, and we are going to have a slide showing you some details about how to be in touch with us, remain in touch, read us. We've covered topics like disputes among German historians about Holocaust memory, Jewish publishing in Italy, the Hungarian government's manipulation of the Jewish community there for its own political ends. As Stéphane was saying, this question of how to build a memorial to the victims of Babi Yar in Ukraine. So, we are Franco-centric, but we want to be less so. That's always our goal. We want to have a broad reach, and we really encourage people to be in touch with us, either with their ideas about articles, pitches, or their feedback. And we are really looking to have a broad, continent-wide conversation. But we also understand that, places like Yevo are in some ways outposts of European Jewry historically in the United States. So that's one of the reasons that we care about being in touch with our American community as well. And I think Jane was going to do the Q&A.
Yeah, hi. So I'm happy to read out a few questions from one of the many questions we have in our Q&A. To everyone who's watching, you're welcome to go ahead and type your question in the Q&A now if you have something that has occurred to you. First off, we'll say maybe back to the very basics. We have some questions about the title of K, how did it come about, and what does it mean?
Okay, the entire title of the review is K, Jews, Europe, the 21st Century. And K came from, originally we thought about the Jewish question, but of course it was not smart to stay with that title. And we think about who was the most beautiful character of the Jewish European modern literature. And we thought about Joseph K. of The Castle, about Kafka, and we finally choose K because of, in reference to Joseph K. and Kafka. But we like the idea, it's a little bit mysterious also.
And we actually got a complaint from a French journal of Kafka studies saying that we stole their name, and we basically told them to sod off. So there you
go. So as some folks have already been clarified, the magazine publishes itself online in French and in English. I'm curious to echo a question from the audience about the languages that UK has chosen? Why those two languages? Do you accept contributions from folks who speak other European languages? What is your method of finding contributors, and in addition to, of course, accepting pitches from the general public?
We translated a lot of text from different languages than in English. So there is text written directly in French, written directly in English, but also written in Italian, in German, in Hungarian, etc. And each time we make translation both in French and in English. We think, of course, to build a page in which all the language of Europe could be read. But of course, it's very difficult. But sometimes our contributor from outside France or English world in Germany, everybody read it in English. In Scandinavia, it's the same. So, but for instance, I remember in Italia, they ask for an Italian version. So we leave an Italian version on the site to let them circulate in Italian, for instance. And we want to develop that, but of course it's difficult to create a third entrance door. So, but it's something we think about. And there is Yiddish also, sometimes directly published in the magazine.
Wonderful. Another question from our audience members is talking about the role of intermarriage in the kind of things you've spoken about already in terms of Jewish identity, specifically in Europe.
I'm not sure I could precisely answer this question. I have no, Masha, you have an idea more precise than
well, I surely know that rabbis, traditional rabbis here in France are very concerned about intermarriage, about interfaith marriages. So it is actually a question because the assimilation of Jews leads to also less Jews. But you also have more liberal communities that accept interfaith couples into their synagogues, and that gives a possibility to these couples to give a Jewish education to their children. But this is something very new here in France. So we'll see what happens when these more liberal communities grow. We'll see if we'll see what will be their effects on the education of young Jewish children.
If I could just jump in on that very briefly, Masha, I wanted to, I would reiterate that in France, the liberal Jewish endeavor is quite minuscule. The liberal Jewish presence, reformer, conservative, majority, or liberal, is quite minimal at this point, though there are some synagogues in Paris which draw quite an audience. They draw quite an audience, but they're still kind of minimal. The way that French Jewish life works religiously is that there is a consistory, which was set up. Essentially, it was a state body. Now it is a community body, which runs religious life for almost all of the country, for all the Jews. It's the central consistory, consistory of French Jewry, and it is an Orthodox body.
I'm not leaving, I'm just taking.
And then you have other synagogues which are not affiliated with the consistory, which are more liberal. But the consistory will not perform an intermarriage.
No.
And of course, the question of intermarriage in France is as fraught as it is in the United States.
So sorry about that. The situation in France is that there is France in general is a very centralized country, especially since the French Revolution and since Napoleon I. It's a very centralized country And so is Judaism, because the Emperor Napoleon commanded the Jews to have one central consistory, which would be the equivalent of the great, with one great rabbi, which would be the equivalent of the great rabbi in Israel. So there is kind of a hierarchy here in France that doesn't exist in the US. One other point is that apart from the consistory in France, there have always been other communities which are not part of that central system, which were either more liberal, but this is quite recent, or more orthodox since the 19th century, or coming from Russia, and that were very different from these French Israelites. So there have always been other communities which are not part of this central system. But we have to add to this aspect the fact that, as I said, many Jews here in France are Sephardic Jews from North Africa, and they have their particular relation to religion, which is that if you take an Ashkenazi Jew here in France, he will be either completely assimilated or extremely religious, like of Hasidic obedience or also Orthodox. A Sephardic Jew is very much in the middle, and what counts to them is also family and to be part of a community. So it's a very different approach. And because of that, there is less, or thanks to that, I don't know how to say, but there is less diversity because people don't act as much as individuals in this case. They act more as families. And a family, they all go to the same synagogue. It's not as much as in the US, where each individual can choose their own path. Third point, French Jews are very much linked, especially in the more religious communities, to Israel. So since Israel recognizes only the consistoire in France as a religious authority, Jews here in France don't want quite often to be part of communities which are not recognized by Israel, because they want to be able to move to Israel, because they are so linked to Israel, because Zionism is so strong. So they will be part of a synagogue, of a community, which is in the central system of the consistoire. Does that answer your question? We can't hear you, Daniel.
I think that's a very good summary of these. I'm not sure. Did Jane have other Q&As that she wanted us to get to?
One more question that I will ask. So from one of the questions from our audience, Yevo is based in New York City. And so many of our constituents and folks who attend our programs are also Americans, though especially with so many of our program being online, I know many of you listening are from all over the world. But I think at Yevo, we're very self-centered in thinking about Americans. So a question from the audience was wondering, how does the role of American Jewry play into both the magazine and perhaps your own thoughts about European Jewish culture as well? And then this will probably be our last question because we'll need to wrap up after that.
Stéphane, do you want to go on this?
I mean, how is it can I would begin to answer by saying that we feel European Jewry, we feel small between two massive groups, small and maybe weak between two massive groups, American Judaism and Israel, of course. And one of the issues for us is to build bond reflection and discussion, of course, with intellectual coming from the States and coming from Israel, and to sedimenter, to build a European voice, pluralist, but one European voice who could also speak with these two massive worlds between which we feel small.
If I can, Stéphane, if I could just intervene, because I think it's a very relevant question. I think there are several aspects to it, which I will try to be brief in responding to. One is that, as Stéphane said, French Jewry, European Jewry is sometimes lost in this bipolar world of Israel and America. Mm-hmm. And so we want to help magnify, to help, accentuate the European Jewish voice, but we cannot do so without being in dialogue with America and Israel, just given where the demographics are today. That's part of it. Another part of it is that, American Jewry, of course, despite its woes over the past few years, embodies still, I think, successful integration and can serve as a model for certain questions of how one preserves group identity and also remains integrated within a larger society. And so it can help French Jews and European Jews in comparative perspective, deal with that question and process it. The third thing is that there's no understanding of European Jewry today without the tie to American Jewry. And that's because American Jewry largely constructed post-war European Jewry. Basically, all the French institutions of Jewish life were set up by the Joint Distribution Committee, the American Jewish Committee after the war. And then, of course, I'm sure that you all know that in Eastern Europe, the World Jewish Congress, a whole host of Jewish institutions have been instrumental in structuring post-Soviet Jewish life. So, American Jewry is very much present in Europe in that sense, and its example is relevant. So that is why we choose to address ourselves to American Jewry in large part. Anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Well, there are certainly many more questions from our audience members, and I'm sure many more questions to come, but thank you so much to our wonderful panelists and for our moderator for beginning such an interesting discussion. If you're interested, you're welcome to follow the writings of Kay online. And of course, we'd also love to encourage you to support Yevo by registering for our future events. So thank you very much.
Jane, could you just show the slideshow with the...
Yeah, I'll show the screen. So, but yeah, thanks to everyone for joining us today, and do connect with our panelists if you have further questions. The email address I'll put on the screen now.
Yeah, that's just like the last slide. And as I said, we really welcome your contributions, your opinions. You can find my email and Stéphane's email here. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You can read us, the English edition, at that first link. And of course, if you want to drop us a small donation, we never say no to that either. I really want to thank Jane and Alex at Yevo for helping us put this together. Thank you all also for bearing with us despite the technical difficulties. And we really look forward to being in touch and having an ongoing conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being part of today's conversation. And absolutely, we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.